In the summer of 1985, my family gathered at Ocean City, Maryland, in one of the high rises along the beach there for one of our beach reunions. It didn't seem too much like a beach to me since we were on the 20th floor. I had always pictured a beach vacation as you would stay in a little cabin back in the woods, back from the beach, and you would sally forth to the beach with your shovels and towels and cricket playing equipment, which in our case was tennis rackets and tennis balls, beer cans to pile up as if they were the wickets. But this was a beach we had gone to in Michigan, in the dunes, way back in the 1950s, when I'd been 7, 8, 9 years old. That was a beach vacation. We played kabaddi there, an Indian game my brothers had learned in India. You'd take turns, but the player in question would gather a huge breath and then venture across a line in the sand on the beach, repeating the word kabaddi, 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 until his breath ran out. And he would try to pull people across the line to his side. They would all try to grab him and pull him across to their side. Meantime, he sang kabaddi, kabaddi, kabaddi over and over again, and that's not easy to do. Anyway, we played kabaddi on the beach there at a place called Palisades Park in Michigan. We stayed in the cabin of another missionary family we knew. We had a great vacation. The cabin, the woods, smelled of pine trees. Everything smelled of these towering pine trees the cabins were among. And the beach was a huge mountainous beach of dunes from the water, which looked like an ocean where you were looking out at Lake Michigan, because you couldn't see the other side, wide beyond measure, especially for a boy of 8 or 9. It was heaven. Ocean City, however, did not strike me as heaven in 1985. We were on the 20th floor. These small airplanes would fly past below our window. That didn't seem right. They'd be trailing banners advertising free pregnancy test, call such and such a number. That seemed to be one of the big messages. College girls gone wild, college boys gone wild, everyone gone wild with beer and whiskey and belching and puking. But we weren't really going wild up there on the 20th floor. I did express my dismay at one point that I didn't have a seam ripper for my sewing project that I had in hand at the moment. I didn't have this little sewer's tool for ripping seams apart. And that bothered me a little. I mentioned it. And lo and behold, the next day, my brother Bill, 12 years older than I, turned up with a seam ripper he had bought at the local mall across the highway. So I had my seam ripper. I remember that specifically from that Ocean City vacation. I remember the fact that my father got confused in traffic as we arrived. This was one of the early signs at age 74 of his encroaching dementia. We didn't know it was coming yet. He didn't know it was coming, but it was coming. At one point, we were making an Indian meal, and we didn't know how to make chapatis. No one knew how in the whole group. Dad was over in the corner being quiet by himself. This was being bounced around the room, this question, how do you make a chapati anyway? And finally he got up and said, I'll make you a chapati. And he did. He remembered how, from his bachelor early days in India in 1932. He had learned how to make chapatis, and he still knew. The memory's a strange thing. His was beginning to go, and yet it still had items from far deep in the past. We were all impressed that Dad knew how to make a chapati. My brother Bill, another memorable moment, was reading through the New York Times, the travel section of the New York Times, which in those days still had lots and lots of ads in it. And here was an ad from Freddie Laker, the economy airline for going across the Atlantic. Well, Freddie Laker was offering later in the year, maybe in September. This would have been early August when we met. Early September, he was offering a limited time offer, $99 from Newark Airport to Brussels. Brussels in Belgium. $99. That really caught Bill's eye. He wished he were free to go in September, just so he could avail himself of this $99 bargain. Had to be cash. You'd pay in cash. You wouldn't be fed. Have to bring a box lunch, sandwich. You couldn't check your bags, I don't think. Had to be a carry-on bag, and that was it. But that's the way most of us traveled in those days. Now, I was a cab driver in New York in that period. I had more flexibility than the rest of my family. But even so, I forgot about this deal, this Freddie Laker deal. I went back to Manhattan, went back to my cab driving. I met a girlfriend I hadn't seen in some 12 or 13 or 14 years. She just happened to be in, what was that place called? The Veselka. I went in there very hungry for breakfast one morning, middle of the morning, and there she sat, eating by herself. I peered at her. Could be none other. I hadn't seen her in many a year. I walked over to her table. I said, "Excuse me, are you?" And I mentioned her name. She looked up at me. She said, "David?" Didn't recognize me. She was who I had named, all right, but I wasn't who she had named. David was someone else. Maybe he had a beard, as I had at that point. I'd never had a beard when she had been my girlfriend some years earlier, many years earlier. David. I said, "No, I'm Richard Mosier. You don't remember me?" And then she did, and she issued me not exactly a frosty greeting, but a less than fulsome greeting, because it hadn't ended very well on my part. My manners had been bad. In fact, I'd simply disappeared. I hadn't said anything, I hadn't explained anything, just disappeared. Back in the early 1970s. She was a beautiful young woman, still was. I said, "Would you mind if I join you? I was going to have breakfast here." She said, "No, I wouldn't mind." So we reintroduced each other. We got to know each other again. And I'll be damned if the same sparks didn't fly again that had flown low those 14, 15, 13 years earlier, whatever it might have been. I ended up staying overnight with her. I ended up getting the key to her apartment in the East Village. She gave it to me. She trusted me again. I went off to Ocean City for my family reunion. I came back to New York and resumed driving a taxi. One Sunday at her apartment, we had the Sunday New York Times, and I was looking through the travel section, and here was this ad, $99 to Brussels from Newark. Cash only, available now. The tickets run out for any flight when the flight fills up. That's how it works. You get there first, you get the ticket. No reservations, bring your own sandwich. "What time is it?" I asked. It was something like 5 in the afternoon. The flight was leaving at 8. I had a few things there. I had a little bag. I threw these things into my bag, and I said, "If I'm not back here by 10 o'clock, I'm on my way to Brussels. Because I had some cash. I was a cab driver. Cab drivers always have cash. I took the bus out to Newark Airport. I got a ticket on the flight. So I bought a little sandwich there in the overpriced airport shop. I got on the plane. I could have called her if I wanted to be super polite and let her know I was going. But I had told her that if I wasn't back at her place, that meant I was in the air. I didn't call her. This was the days before cell phones. Finding a payphone that worked in New York was a little difficult. Sometimes you had to have the right change, and you had to be considerate enough to think of doing it. It never crossed my mind. I got on the flight with my little bag, stuffed it overhead, ate my little sandwich, and more than a little pleased with myself, I fell asleep, winging my way in a Freddie Laker plane east across the Atlantic. I wished I could tell my brother Bill I was on my way. I might have been tempted to give him a phone call to brag that I'd gotten on one of these flights, because he would have been happy for me. But there wasn't time. It was all kind of rushed. People were milling around trying to buy tickets once the tickets ran out, but I had gotten mine. I'd just been in time. I'd seen that ad and I'd jumped on the subway to get to the Port Authority, get across to Newark. I was on my way to Brussels. Had no plan. So the plane got in sometime around the middle of the morning, Brussels time, or closer to noon, I guess. Anyway, time to eat. I was hungry again. This sandwich I'd had on the flight had been just a little thing. First of all, I had to start figuring out what I was going to do. I wasn't going to visit Brussels. I was going to go first to Paris. So I got the local commuter line train into Brussels to the main station, and I found a train to Paris. Was coming soon. I bought a ticket. I hopped on. 2-hour trip to Paris was all. I was jet lagged and I was very hungry. I figured maybe there's a restaurant car, a bar car of some sort on this train. Even Amtrak has those awful sandwiches you can buy. If I'm desperate, I'll buy an Amtrak sandwich, if that's the equivalent of what they have. So I started walking back along all the passenger cars of this train. And lo and behold, if I didn't walk straight into heaven, it was a restaurant car with white tablecloths on the tables, real glasses, wine glasses, water glasses, cloth napkins. With no hesitation, I sat down. There were other people dining in this car. I waited till the waiter came around. He handed me the menu and said in French, "This is what we have today, monsieur. It's all very good. It's prepared in a fancy hotel in Brussels, known for its cuisine. This is first-class dining, monsieur." I was in a fog of exhaustion. I just looked down on the card and I saw that they had whatever the name for Cornish game hen was in French, which I don't remember now. Something like that. Sounded good. I ordered that. The price was kind of steep, but not too bad. And I figured, why not? All this money, I'd saved hundreds of dollars getting on this Freddie Laker flight, even though otherwise I had no intention of going to Europe at this point. But I couldn't not avail myself of this bargain. In a while, he brought me my Cornish game hen, small glass of white wine as I had requested, some lovely prepared vegetables, wonderful bread in a little basket. I snarfed it all up, especially that delectable small chicken. and I suspect the waiter was rather watching me with interest. Something about me must not have corresponded to the diners he most generally got in that car. If I'd looked around to study my surroundings a little more, I was looking out the window at these lovely farmhouses going by, at these villages we were passing straight through. This was the way to travel on a train right through the heart of Europe with wonderful food. I was looking there. I wasn't looking around at these other diners in the dining car. If I had looked at them, I might have noticed that they were dressed with more care than I was. I was dressed more like a Freddie Laker economy passenger than like the rest of the diners in that car. They might have noticed me, a few of them, but I didn't notice any of them. But as I say, I think the waiter did notice me, and he was amused. He's a young guy, younger than I was. I was in my mid-30s. At one point, he sidled over to me, kind of sideways, and out of the corner of his mouth, in a low tone only I could hear, he said, "Say, monsieur, would you like another bird?" Another chicken, another game hen. He was offering me for free, I could tell. They must have had a spare in the kitchen, and he saw how ravenous I was. I said, "Oui, monsieur. Merci beaucoup." And it just appeared there on my plate. Another poule. Ah, I ate the whole thing. I almost ate the bones. It was so good. Lovely vegetables. Then the man brought me an eclair, a perfect chocolate eclair without my even asking, and coffee. And then eventually he brought me my bill, and I paid it. He greeted me a very enthusiastic farewell as I got off the car. I had tipped him well. After all, I was a taxi driver. I knew about tipping. And in France, at any rate, probably in Belgium too, they don't tip waiters. Very rarely. Only if you have extraordinary service, such as being given an extra bird with your terrific meal. I almost said with your first class meal, because it was only after this effusive farewell from the waiter, as I was leaving the car and going back to my own seat, that I noticed on the outside of the door I'd gone in the first place into the restaurant car, that it said, "First class only, restaurant car." Oops. But it was done. I had done it. It was a deed accomplished in all innocence and simplicity. The best meal I have eaten in my entire life. I had no one to share the experience with, except this fine young waiter who was so generous to me, and to whom I was so generous in my tipping. It was a meal prepared in Brussels and finished in the kitchen of this first-class dining car on its way to Paris, where I would have other adventures, not all quite so lucky as dining in that first-class car, but worth living.